The sun dipped low over the sprawling acres of Sagebrush Valley, casting long shadows across the dusty trails of the Rolling Hooves Ranch. The ranch, a patchwork of weathered fences and rolling pastures, was home to Clara Thompson, a third-generation horse breeder with a stubborn streak as wide as the horizon. Clara's life was her horses, 20 majestic creatures, each with a spirit as untamed as the land itself. Her ranch sat on the edge of the Sagebrush Homeowners Association, a pristine gated community where manicured lawns and cookie-cutter homes stood in stark contrast to Clara's rugged paradise. The HOA had long eyed her property with disdain, their letters piling up in her mailbox, demanding she trim her wild grasses or paint her barn to match their approved color palette. Clara ignored them, tossing their notices into the fire pit with a scoff. Her land was hers, and no clipboard-wielding busybody would tell her how to run it. But the HOA's latest move was different. Clara returned from a supply run to find her ranch gates, two sturdy iron structures that guarded the main entrance to her property, nailed shut with thick industrial spikes. The wood around the hinges splintered under the force, and a bright yellow notice from the HOA was taped to the gate, citing unauthorized access concerns and demanding immediate compliance. Clara's blood boiled. The gates weren't just a boundary. They were the lifeline to her pastures, the only way to move her horses to grazing fields or the training corral. Nailing them shut was like caging her animals, her livelihood, her very soul. She grabbed a crowbar from her truck, her hands trembling with rage, and began prying the nails loose. Each groan of metal echoed her frustration, but the spikes were stubborn. Driven deep by someone with a vendetta, as she worked, Clara noticed something else, a new chain-link fence, gleaming under the fading sunlight, cutting across the northern edge of her property. It wasn't hers. The HOA had erected it without warning, slicing off a corner of her land that bordered their precious community. The fence stood tall, a smug declaration of their authority, and Clara could almost hear the HOA president, Marjorie Pennington, cackling behind her pristine white picket fence. Marjorie, with her perfectly coiffed hair and penchant for power trips, had been Clara's nemesis since the HOA annexed the land around her ranch 5 years ago. This fence, these nails, they were Marjorie's doing, Clara was sure of it. She didn't know how, but she'd make them pay. Hours later, the gates were free, but the damage was done. The hinges sagged and the wood was scarred. Clara's horses, sensing the tension, pawed nervously in their stalls. She walked the perimeter, her boots kicking up dust, and saw the new fence's posts driven deep into her grazing land. It wasn't just an eyesore. It was theft. The HOA had redrawn her property lines without so much as a phone call. Clara's mind raced. She could call her lawyer, but legal battles were slow, and the HOA had deep pockets. She could confront Marjorie, but that woman thrived on conflict, twisting words like a snake. No, Clara needed something else. Something that would hit the HOA where it hurt. The next morning, Clara woke to a storm brewing on the horizon, dark clouds rolling in like a warning. She checked her horses, their coats gleaming despite the gloom, and noticed the gate to the main pasture was ajar. Her heart sank. In her exhaustion the night before, she hadn't secured it properly. She ran to the pasture, her boots sinking into the muddy earth, and found it empty. All 20 horses were gone. Panic gripped her as she scanned the horizon, her eyes landing on the HOA's new fence, or what was left of it. The chain link lay in a tangled heap, trampled flat by hoofprints that stretched into the distance. Clara followed the trail, her pulse pounding, and saw her horses galloping freely through the HOA's pristine community. They tore through manicured lawns, toppled decorative mailboxes, and churned rose gardens into mud. Clara's fear gave way to a flicker of grim satisfaction. The HOA wanted a war? They'd just gotten one. The horses, led by Clara's favorite stallion, Thunder, moved like a living tide, their hooves carving paths through the HOA's carefully curated perfection. Marjorie's prized azalea beds were now a churned mess, and the community's ornamental pond was a muddy soup. Clara chased after them, calling their names, but the herd was wild with freedom, unstoppable in their rampage. By the time she corralled them back to the ranch, the damage was catastrophic. The HOA's common areas looked like a battlefield, and Clara knew the fallout would be fierce. She locked the gates, her hands shaking, and waited for the inevitable. The storm broke overhead, rain lashing the ranch as if nature itself was bracing for what came next. Night fell, and Clara sat in her kitchen, the flicker of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. She sipped coffee, her mind replaying the day's chaos. The horses were safe, but the HOA wouldn't let this slide. As thunder rumbled outside, headlights pierced the darkness. A sleek black SUV parked at her gate, and Clara knew who it was before the driver stepped out. Marjorie Pennington, clipboard in hand, was coming for her. The battle lines were drawn, and Clara's ranch was about to become ground zero. The rain had turned Sagebrush Valley into a quagmire by dawn, the muddy trails reflecting the turmoil brewing in Clara's heart. She stood at her porch, watching the horizon where the HOA's community lay, its once pristine lawns now scarred by her horse's hooves. The destruction was a spectacle: shredded flower beds, toppled fences, and a community signpost leaning like a drunken sailor. Clara felt a pang of guilt, but it was fleeting. The HOA had pushed her too far, and her horses, in their wild rebellion, had only done what she secretly wished she could. Still, she knew the retaliation would be swift and merciless. Marjorie Pennington wasn't one to let a blow to her ego go unanswered. By mid-morning, a certified letter arrived, delivered by a nervous courier who avoided Clara's gaze. The envelope bore the HOA's embossed logo, and inside was a summons to an emergency board meeting that evening. The letter accused Clara of willful destruction of community property and threatened fines, liens, and even legal action to seize her land if she didn't comply. Clara's jaw tightened as she read Marjorie's name at the bottom, the signature sharp and angular like a blade. The HOA claimed her horses had caused $50,000 in damages, a number Clara knew was inflated to bully her into submission. She crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fire pit, her resolve hardening. They wanted a fight? She'd give them one. Clara spent the day preparing. She checked her property lines, digging through old deeds in her attic, the yellowed papers smelling of dust and history. The HOA's new fence, she confirmed, encroached on her land by 10 feet, a clear violation. She photographed the trampled chain link, the hoofprints and the nails still embedded in her gate, building a case of her own. The horses, meanwhile, grazed calmly in their pasture, oblivious to the storm they'd unleashed. Clara envied their peace. As evening approached, she dressed in her best flannel and boots, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a sterile building with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs. Clara walked in, her boots echoing on the polished floor, and felt the weight of every eye on her. Marjorie sat at the head of the table, her smile as cold as the rain outside. The meeting was a blur of accusations. The board presented photos of the destruction, each image a stab at Clara's heart. They called her reckless, a menace, a blight on their community. Clara sat silently, her hands folded, letting them exhaust their venom. When it was her turn to speak, she stood, her voice steady as she laid out her evidence. The HOA's illegal fence, the nailed gates, the years of harassment. She didn't mention the horse's escape, letting the board assume it was an accident. The room grew quiet, the air thick with tension. Marjorie's smile faltered, but only for a moment. She adjourned the meeting with a promise to review the evidence, but Clara knew better. This was far from over. Back at the ranch, Clara found a new notice taped to her gate. The HOA had doubled down, demanding she pay for the damages within a week or face a lawsuit. Worse, they'd scheduled an inspection of her property, claiming concerns about her horse's welfare. Clara's stomach churned. This wasn't about lawns or fences anymore, it was about control. Marjorie wanted her land, her freedom, her way of life. Clara looked out at her horses, their silhouettes against the moonlit pasture, and felt a fire ignite within her. She'd fought for this ranch her whole life, and she wasn't about to let it go. The HOA had drawn first blood, but Clara was ready to strike back. The next move would be hers, and it would shake Sagebrush Valley to its core.